All right. Point number 2 is moving away from storyboards to SwiftUI. This one doesn't need a huge, lengthy explanation. It's pretty straightforward. If you look at the storyboard file currently, you're going to see that there's a bunch of code here, or well, I should say views, that have been effectively styled using this designer feature, right? So if we look at the source code for this file, if we identify it, so it's called main.storyboard, and if we look at it as a source code, you're going to see that it looks a little bit like this. It's incredibly difficult to manage this, and it's like 1,000 lines of random stuff in here. And because it is drag and drop, because it is us opening it up and editing it, like the auto-generated code is all over the place. This is difficult to difficult to use version control with. It's a mess in general. But, you can get a lot of this stuff done, and it's fine. Some of this stuff has been compartmentalized or, been done in a kind of generic way already. For example, preferences uses a stack view and then references these different zip files, which are also kind of like storyboard files. But they are individual sections of the UI. So it's like having a SwiftUI little element, and then we're like swapping them in the right place. So for example, this is a checkbox preference view, which allows us to supply a preference that is toggled with a checkbox, right? Or a select preference view, which allows us to, give you a bunch of options, and then a hotkey preference view, which is used for selecting the global hotkey for PHP Monitor. But it's done all programmatically. So moving that to SwiftUI eventually is going to be easier than some of this other stuff, which has been dragged in and edited, and constraints have been added. And if you look at this stuff, auto layout has been added. It's going to be an adventure to migrate this over, but it's going to be better because this is difficult to maintain. Compare that to the ease of use of building views like this with SwiftUI, where I can just, write the SwiftUI code and then effectively write what is a preview provider, where I can test a bunch of states, right? So for example, I have one here, and let me show you just how quickly we can, and again, this is very cool. So for example, we have a services view here. That's the first one that we're rendering. And we're rendering it with these services to display, but as it happens to be, our dummy services object is empty. That means that our view needs to display the loading state. And you can see here, looking at this, we get the loading icon. But once our data is loaded, once we do have some data in here, when the dummy services are initialized, we get a little true or false pair for every service that identifies whether the service is running or not. So we can change this on the fly and make this false, right? And then save it, resume the re-rendering, and you'll see that this is going to then flip, right? So it immediately flips to false, right? And I can swap it back to true, and it's going to reflect that appearance as well. Again, this also allows me to test a bunch of things. So let's say we have information about these services. That's what has been resolved. But we actually would like to display all of these 6 services, so including ones that are loaded from our custom JSON file. Well, no biggie. We can just do that, and we can specify how many we want per row. So let's say, we want to try out 4 per row. That's how easy it is, right? Super quick, and we get all these previews, and they run in real time. We can even run them in the application by clicking on the button here, and then going preview in PHP Monitor, and then we can even interact with these, because they will, clicking on these buttons will actually do stuff as well, right? So that's really cool. And that is, of course, a very nice feature of SwiftUI. And so transitioning away from these zip files, which are initialized and kind of clunky, to SwiftUI is going to be a big boon, but it's going to be challenging because I've never used this stuff before. There's some very cool things about this though, about this migration. There's just some stuff that you don't need to worry about anymore. One of the things you can do is, for example, say that you are observing an object. So there's an annotation here called observed object. When we go into the services manager, we say it is an observable object, and we can have it publish data. So what this services manager publishes as data is the user, and the root services. This is a list of key value pairs, basically. So dictionary, 2 dictionaries with the names and then more detailed description, homebrew service objects of the information that it is able to retrieve. So what we do is we run sudo services, sudo brew services info all JSON. That gets me all the information I need to know about the services that are running as root. And that is piped into here, basically, right? And that information, or I say piped, stored in this variable. But whenever it changes, it notifies any observers, because it uses this published annotation, and then the UI will update. So all I need to do is run some of this stuff, again, asynchronously. This is still using the old notation. We'll look into that in the next video. But what happens is we do something asynchronously, and when that completes, we update on the main thread this root services property, which will be published, which then cascades back to the UI, which will reflect the new state of the services manager right away. I don't need to do any extra work for that myself, which is phenomenal, and I really like that. So that's what's coming next. A lot more views in SwiftUI, and a lot more seamless publishing of state, I think, which is going to be wonderful.